Ruby Nell Bridges was born on September 8, 1954 in Tylertown, Mississippi, and grew up on the farm her parents and grandparents sharecropped in Mississippi. When she was 4 years old, her parents moved to New Orleans hoping for a better life in a bigger city. When Ruby was in kindergarten, she was one of many African American students in New Orleans who were chosen to take a test determining whether or not she could attend a white school. It is said the test was written to be especially difficult so that students would have a hard time passing. The idea was that if all the African American children failed the test, New Orleans schools might be able to stay segregated for a while longer. Ruby lived only 5 blocks from an all-white school, but attended kindergarten several miles away at an all-black segregated school. Her father didn't want his daughter taking the test, believing that if she passed and was allowed to go to the white school, there would be trouble. She was eventually able to convince Ruby's father to let her take the test. Ruby's parents were informed by officials from the NAACP that Ruby had passed the test. People feared there might be some civil disturbances. The federal district court judge requested the U.S. government to send federal marshals to New Orleans to protect the child. On the morning of November 14, 1960, federal marshals drove Ruby and her mother 5 blocks to her new school. While in the car, one of the men explained that when they arrived at the school, 2 marshals would walk in front of Ruby and 2 would be behind her. The image of this small black girl being escorted to school by 4 large white men inspired Norman Rockwell to create the painting The Problem We All Must Live With. When Ruby and the federal marshals arrived at the school, large crowds of people were gathered in front, yelling and throwing objects. There were barricades set up and policemen everywhere. The chaos outside and the fact that nearly all the white parents at the school had kept their children home meant classes weren't going to be held. On her second day, the circumstances were much the same as the first, and for a while it looked like Ruby Bridges wouldn't be able to attend class. Only one teacher, Mrs. Henry, agreed to teach Ruby. Ruby was the only student in Henry's class because parents pulled or threatened to pull their children from Ruby's class and send them to other schools. For a full year, Henry and Ruby sat side by side at 2 desks, working on Ruby's lessons. Henry was very loving and supportive of Ruby, helping her not only with her studies, but also with the difficult experience of being ignored. On her second day of school, a woman threatened to poison her. After this, the federal marshals allowed her only to eat food from home. On another day, she was greeted by a woman displaying a black doll in a wooden coffin. Ruby's mother kept encouraging her to be strong and pray while entering the school. She spent her entire day, every day, in Mrs. Henry's classroom, not allowed to go to the cafeteria or to recess with other students in the school. When she had to go to the restroom, the federal marshals walked her down the hall. The abuse wasn't limited to only Ruby. Her family suffered as well. Her father lost his job at the filling station, and her grandparents were sent off the land they had sharecropped for over 25 years. The grocery store where the family shopped banned them from entering. However, many others in the community, both black and white, began to show support in a variety of ways. Gradually, families began to send their children back to the school. A neighbor provided Ruby's father with a job, while others volunteered to babysit the 4 children and walk behind federal marshals on the trips to school. After winter break, Ruby began to show signs of stress. She experienced nightmares and would wake her mother in the middle of the night seeking comfort. For a time, she stopped eating lunch in her classroom, which she usually ate alone. Wanting to be with other students, she would not eat the sandwiches her mother packed for her, but instead hid them in a storage cabinet in the classroom. Soon, a janitor discovered the mice and cockroaches who had found the sandwiches. The incident led Mrs. Henry to eat lunch with Ruby in the classroom. Ruby started seeing a psychologist who was very concerned about how a girl so young would handle the pressure. He saw Ruby once a week, either at school or at her home. He later wrote a series of books on how children handle change, including a children's book on Ruby's experience. Today, Ruby is 62 years old. Ruby is such a good example of courage and strength, and what she went through impacted the freedoms enjoyed by millions of people back then and today.